So we're going to be looking at the last two chapters in the SOP manual today. Chapter 7, which is project implementation and monitoring, and chapter 8, which is the project completion and evaluation. Now, when you've been appointed project director or project manager of a PMU, project management unit, and you have been given the assignment or the task of implementing a project, there are two documents you must have with you before you start your work. Two documents. And what are these documents? The two documents you must have before you can start. Number one is the PAM or PIM, Project Administration Manual, or the World Bank calls it the Project Implementation Manual. So that is a key document you must have with you before you can start the implementation of your project. Why? As I mentioned yesterday, the PAM or the PIM contains all the information you need to know to implement the project, from the organization structure, the implementation plan, right? The procurement plan, the environment and resettlement plans, detailed terms of reference for the consultants, and so on. Without this, you cannot start the project, right? And the other document is a document also we refer to quite a lot on day 1 and day 2. And what is that document? It is the DP's financing agreement. We place a lot of emphasis on that document. Remember, we talked about how if there's a conflict between the government's SOPs and the DP's financing agreement, which one will prevail? The DP financing agreement will prevail. So you must have a copy of the DP financing agreement, because that will set out all the policies and guidelines that you have to follow in implementing your project. It will also set out all the conditions that you will have to meet during implementation of the project, like your reporting requirements, the submission of audited financial statements, project accounts, and so on. Some of the institutional and sector reform conditions, they will all be in the DP financing agreement. Conditions for contract award. How will you know about them? You will know about them by looking at the DP financing agreement. So these two documents must be with you before you start your work as a PMU. Okay? Now, when we look at project implementation and monitoring, we look at a number of subjects. Okay, so we look at the implementation structure, recruitment of consultants, procurement of goods and works, financial management, environment and social safeguards, performance monitoring and reporting, and DP supervision. So these are the elements of what you will have to do, the main areas or subjects that you will have to cover during implementation and monitoring. The project management, we talked about it quite a lot yesterday. The PMU has to be dedicated PMU, that means full-time PMU. The project director does not have to be full-time, because the project director only has oversight responsibilities. But from the project manager and down to the finance officer, the procurement officer, and so on, have to be full-time PMU staff, right? And the implementation is carried out in accordance with the PAM, the DP financing agreement, procurement manual, financial manual, management manual, and so on. This is not a complete list because it should include the land acquisition and resettlement manual, MOEs, environmental prakas, and so on. Okay, so this is not a complete list, but these are the main guidelines and SOPs that you will have to follow when you implement the project. Okay. The project performance is monitored in accordance with the procedures and targets agreed at project preparation. So where will you find these performance targets? We looked at this yesterday morning. The project results framework. The project results framework will have all the output and outcome performance indicators and targets. And your job as a PMU is to monitor the achievement of these targets and performance indicators. Okay, so the project results framework will be part of the PAM. I did not mention this earlier. The PAM will also include the project results framework. Okay, and then of course, regular reporting. So the DP will require the PMU to submit regular progress reports. Now, regular can be monthly, can be quarterly, can be half yearly, depending on the DP. The most common one is quarterly. Every 3 months, you will be required to report to MEF and the DP on the progress of the project. Not just the progress of the project, but all aspects of the project, right? Physical implementation, financial progress, status of contract awards, disbursements, status of the implementation of the environment plans and resettlement plans. What are the problems you've encountered during implementation? And what steps and actions have you taken to resolve those problems? So all of that has to be included in the progress report. So these are, again, the responsibilities of the project management unit, right? Responsible for implementation of the project, authority and financial powers to operate effectively. This has to be given through a prakas. Maintain integrity, good governance and capacity building, effective communication, guided by the PAM and supported by consultants. Okay. Again, just like in project preparation, during implementation, there is a lot of technical work involved, right? Supervising the work of the contractors, for example, civil works construction. It's quite a detailed work involved. The engineer has to be responsible for checking on the work on a daily basis, on resolving any on-site issues, on checking the bill of quantities of bill of works that is submitted at the end of each month, and signing off on the bill of works. So these tasks are all very highly technical tasks, and the PMU may not have the expertise or the resources to deal with all of these tasks. So there will be a team of consultants referred to as supervision consultants, project supervision consultants, who will be recruited and financed by the DP to support the work of the PMU. And most of these consultants today are international experts as well as national consultants. Maybe in the future, we would like to see the consultants being entirely national consultants. So there should be a building of capacity, not just in government, but also in the national consulting industry, so that in the future, you don't have to rely so much on international experts. Okay. Then there's the annual work plans, procurement tracking form, and so on and so on. So there's a whole list of activities and actions that the PMU is responsible for. So in this slide, we have listed some of the main responsibilities and actions. Okay. key PMU staff, we've been through that before, project director, manager, administrative officer, and so on. And the terms of reference for each of these positions is in Appendix 13 of the SOP Project Management Manual. Again, project management unit led by the project director, project manager responsible for day-to-day activities, the team, the project management team, project management unit should have all the skills and expertise and experience to match their responsibilities. So when you recruit staff for the PMU, you will have the terms of reference, and you should make sure that the people who are recruited for the PMU have the experience and the skills to perform the tasks set out in the terms of reference. They have to work full-time, and the removal of the project director or project manager has to be done in consultation with MEF and sometimes also the DP. Sometimes the DP will state in the DP financing agreement that removal of project director will have to be done with their concurrence, or they will have to be consulted. So some DPs will do that. I don't think the ADB does that, but some DPs may do that. So if that is the case, then when you remove or change the project director, then you have to do it in consultation with MEF and DP. So the project management manual spends quite a lot of time on the subject of PMU in terms of when it has to be established. We talked about it in project readiness, in terms of the staffing, the terms of reference, and the responsibilities of the PMU. Because the PMU is key to the implementation of the project, right? After you have identified the project, you've prepared the project, you've got the financing agreement in place, the next stage, which is 5 to 7 years, is implementation. So you must have a very strong PMU and a very strong organization structure, clear reporting lines, clear responsibilities, so that you can carry out so many tasks involved in project implementation. So you need a clear and strong organization structure, and you need a strong PMU, properly staffed with all the required expertise. And you need the support from supervision consultants. So if these three things are in place, then you should be able to handle all the implementation problems that you will face. It does not mean your implementation will be smooth, because that is the nature of project implementation. There will always be problems with the consultants, problems with the contractors, problems with delivery of supplies, right? Problems with the design, because the design is done and then the contractors maybe find the designs not appropriate in some cases, problems with paying compensation or resettlement, all kinds of issues come up during implementation. But if you have a strong organization structure, a strong PMU with all the required skills, and the support of supervision consultants, and the DP supervision mission, you should be able to resolve all these issues on a timely basis. There will always be issues. It's a question of how you identify these issues and what actions you take to resolve these issues. That is the challenge in the implementation of development projects. Now we come to the PAM. The PAM is a guide, as I mentioned before, is a guide for project implementation. It contains all the detailed implementation arrangements, right? It is prepared by the it says here it's prepared by the PPT in consultation with DP and confirmed at financing negotiation. So the responsibility, I think this question came up yesterday. The responsibility for preparing the PAM is with the PPT, the project preparation team, or the EA, right? EA's team. But in actual fact, in practice, most of the information, as I mentioned before, comes from the DP due diligence aid memoir or MOU. So in many cases, the PAM is prepared by the DP team, but the responsibility for the PAM is with the EA or the project preparation team. But because most of this information or all of this information comes from the DP's due diligence aid memoir or MOU, oftentimes the PAM is prepared by the DP team that is in the field, okay? But the responsibility is with the project preparation team. Okay, so that means once you receive the draft PAM, you have to go through it very carefully to make sure that the draft PAM reflects all the information that was agreed to at the end of the DP due diligence mission. What or ADB, in ADB's language, the ADB fact-finding mission. So at the end of that fact-finding mission or due diligence mission, there will be an aid memo, MOU, recording all the arrangements, all the agreements reached on the implementation of the project. And this information is transferred to the PAM. And you are responsible for the PAM because you will be using the PAM for implementation. So you have to check the PAM to make sure it reflects the discussions and understandings and agreements reached at the end of the due diligence. All right. The PAM is the main document we use for implementation, but it is supplemented. The PAM cannot contain every single bit of information that you will need. We will need to refer to supplementary documents. And what are these supplementary documents? SOP for procurement, SOP for financial management. And as I mentioned earlier, this slide is incomplete because we will also need to refer to the SOP for land acquisition and resettlement, right? And we need to refer to the MOE's guidelines of PRAKAS on the environment. So all of these other documents will supplement the PAM. You may have to refer to them at different times. Okay? Recruitment consultants, contract management. Many of you are very interested in this subject because this is a very difficult subject. Again, the project management manual covers this subject in principle. The details, how to deal with specific issues in contract management, you will have to refer to the procurement manual. Okay? And I would suggest that the government should conduct separate training or clinics on contract management because it's a very important subject. If you don't know contract management, the issues involved in contract management, it is going to be very difficult for you to be in the PMU as project manager and to implement a project. So you have to know this very well. But the project management manual only covers the principles. For details, you either have to go to the procurement manual or I think the government should conduct specialized training or clinics in contract management. All right. So let's look at the principles of contract management. The PMU is responsible for supervising and managing the work of the contractors and the consultants. Okay, so overall responsibility is with the PMU. They have to ensure that the consultants deliver the outputs, the required outputs, with the expected quality and within agreed time frame. Okay, so in terms of the details, the work involves daily supervision of the work of contractors and consultants, issuance of variations, maximize transfer of knowledge, monitor submission of timesheets and reports, make payments in accordance with the contract, consider termination for poor performing consultants or contractors, but there's a process for this, and you have to follow the process set out in the contract provisions and in the government's regulations, and you will only do this with the approval of MEF and the development partner. And finally, you have to evaluate performance. So these are not how to do, but these are some of the main tasks involved in contract management. How to do this, you will have to go to the procurement manual for reference, or as I suggested earlier, I think the government should conduct more detailed training on this specific subject of contract management in the future, in the near future. But in terms of the tasks are listed here in this slide, and this is what is in the project management manual. So likewise, you have to deal with procurement, right? Evaluation and approval of contracts, complaints handling mechanism, financial management, right? EA is responsible for financial management under the overall guidance of the MEF. And this responsibility is delegated to the PMU, which shall maintain proper accounting records of all transactions related to the implementation of the project. So this manage financial resources with due diligence and prudence, and financial practices in accordance with RGC's financial management manual. Project accounts, you have to prepare project accounts, have them audited every year and submitted to the development partner. Disbursements, very important subject. If you don't have disbursements, meaning two things will happen. The contractors and consultants will not get paid, and you cannot show financial progress of the project. So even though you have done your procurement and you have awarded the contracts and the construction has started and the consultants are doing their work in the field, if you don't understand disbursements and what needs to be done to have disbursements, then what happens? The contractor will stop work because the contractor is not paid. The consultants will go home because they're not being paid. And you can't, and your financial progress in your project will be zero, no disbursements. So you must, project managers, you must understand this subject. And your finance officer in your PMU team must know this subject backwards, inside out, right? So most development partners have 4 types of disbursement procedures: reimbursement, advance fund, direct payment, and commitment letter. And you will use these disbursement procedures depending on the circumstances. So in some countries, they are able to use the government budget first to pay for project expenditures. And then later, they will get the money back from the development partner. This procedure is referred to as the reimbursement procedure. So this is not a procedure that is used very much in Cambodia, especially with ADB projects, because in most cases, the government is not allocating any budget for the project components. It may allocate a budget for the PMU, but not for the project components. So you cannot make payments from your own budget. So you will then have to use something called the direct payment procedure. So under this procedure, when the contractor or supplier or consultant submits the invoice or the bill, you as the PMU will be responsible for checking the bill to make sure that the bill or invoice is correct and the goods have been delivered or the civil works have been performed. And you will get your consulting engineer, the engineer on your consulting supervision team to help you with that. So once you confirm that the works have been performed, you take responsibility for that invoice or bill, and then you submit that invoice or bill to the development partner through something called a withdrawal application, right? You attach the bill to the withdrawal application. It goes to MEF. MEF will review it and then send it to the development partner. And the development partner will then make the payment directly to the bank account of the contractor or consultant or supplier. So that's the most common form of disbursement procedure used in Cambodia. Then we have the advance fund. Sometimes DP may give the EA or the PMU an advance, right? A small amount, maybe $50,000, for you to make payments, small payments. So you can make payments for small project expenditures. And then when that fund needs replenishment, you go back to the DP, you show them how you use the funds, and then you will get the fund replenished. At the end of the project, when the project is completed, before you close the project accounts, any unused funds in that account, in that advance account, has to be returned to the development partner. All right. And finally, the fourth procedure, I won't explain it in too detail, but it applies when you have a letter of credit. So sometimes in some contracts, especially supply contracts, equipment contracts, the preferred method of payment by suppliers of equipment will be a letter of credit. So where the payment method is letter of credit, development partners, World Bank, ADB, and JICA has a procedure called the commitment letter. So this commitment letter is like a guarantee against the letter of credit. So when the letter of credit becomes due for payment, the commercial bank does not have to make the payment. ADB or the World Bank will make the payment directly to the supplier's commercial bank, right? So that is what disbursement is about. Then we have all the monitoring requirements and so on. Project report, as I mentioned earlier, this is very important. Again, in most cases, the consultants will prepare the project progress report, but it is your responsibility as the executing agency, as the PMU. So you have to know what goes into this progress report. And not only that, when you're called up by the DP or MEF for that matter, you should be able to explain every aspect of this progress report, even though it may be prepared by the supervision consultant, right? So what are the things that are covered in a project report? Implementation progress, right? Physical and financial. Status of contract awards, disbursements, recruitment, and so on. We've been through this before, right? So these are the subjects that will have to be covered in a progress report. Okay, let's move on to chapter 8. If you have any questions on project implementation and monitoring, as I mentioned earlier, please send them into my colleague Ratanak, and we will try and get back to you on those. Yeah, what are those questions?
This question is not specified, just asking like implementing ministry is also required for report. And
Sorry, I don't understand the question.
implementing ministry is also requested for the report.
I don't understand.
Yeah, I understand. I try to make them specified, but don't reply.
Okay, what's the other question?
Another one, the budget ceiling of the project depend on what?
The?
The ceiling, project ceiling, I mean the budget ceiling.
I don't understand the question either. I don't understand the question.
Okay.
Okay, let's go on to project completion and evaluation. When the project is completed, there are a number of things you need to do, right? When the project is physically completed, construction has ended, consultants have completed the work and so on. So a number of things you have to do. Firstly, you have to close all your project bank accounts. So during implementation of the project, in accordance with the prakas issued by the ministry, you have opened some bank accounts, right? And you have been operating those bank accounts. So you have to close those bank accounts. And before you close those bank accounts, you have to do a bank reconciliation, right? And then you have to close those bank accounts. Okay. And then any money in those bank accounts that belong to the DP, for example, if the DP had given you an advance under the imprest fund procedure, any unused funds will have to be returned to the DP. Okay. And then there's the handover of the completed project. Okay. As a PMU, you hand it over to the ministry that is responsible for the operation of the project. So the handover also involves some government regulations that you have to follow. But most important is on project completion is you have an O&M strategy in place. What's an O&M strategy? The O&M strategy is a plan for how you're going to maintain the project so that it is in good operating order, that is fit for purpose throughout the economic life of the project. So when we design a project, we don't design a project for 2 or 3 years. We design a project for 15 to 25 years. So a project facility, after it's constructed, should last 15 to 25 years, depending on the project. But to make it last, to make it fit for purpose for 15 years or 25 years, you need to carry out some maintenance. So you need to have in place an O&M strategy, an operation and maintenance strategy, so that the project will be maintained properly to ensure that the benefits from the project will accrue over the economic life of the project. And this O&M strategy will have 2 parts. The first part is the part we all know, is the financial requirements, the budget, the allocations that are required. So first you have to estimate what are the annual maintenance requirements. Then you have to plan a budget for each of these years. And you have to make sure that the EA or the government is aware of these budget requirements and that each year budget is allocated for these maintenance requirements. The second aspect is the capacity issue. Does the EA or the line ministry that is going to maintain this, that is responsible for maintaining this project asset, do they have the technical and managerial capacity to carry out the maintenance? So not only must you have the money, you must have the managerial and technical capacity to carry out these works. So this is referred to as the O&M strategy. So recently when ADB did an evaluation of completed projects in Cambodia, more than 60%, the finding was more than 60 or nearly 70% of the projects were not sustainable. The evaluation showed that, in the opinion of the completion team that did the evaluation, the projects were not sustainable, meaning over the economic life of the project, the completed project facilities were at risk in terms of delivering the intended benefits. Not sustainable. Why? Because there was no O&M arrangement in place. Either the budgets were not prepared and not identified and not allocated, or the EA did not have the awareness and the technical and managerial capacity to carry out the O&M. So that's one of the most important aspects now that the government is emphasizing when it comes to project completion. Aside from all the procedural things that you have to do, like closing of the bank accounts, handing over the assets, preparing the project completion report, and so on. Okay. Now, how do you determine when a project is completed? The project is deemed completed when the equipment has been delivered and the project components are substantially constructed and the project facility is in operation. So once those conditions are met, the project is deemed to be completed. So the EA and PMU should prepare an O&M strategy to ensure the sustainability of the completed project infrastructure. And there are some responsibilities for the PMU and EA regarding the handover of the project assets and the time when this responsibility ends. Okay, it should cover the warranty or defects liability period. So here's more details about closing date, right? How to close accounts, how to extend the closing date. I think we covered this yesterday, and so on. Handover, there's some very detailed steps that you have to follow for the handover of project facilities. All of this is in the project management manual, and there will be further details in the financial management manual. Completion report. So at the end of the project, the EA is required to prepare a project completion report. Okay, usually 3 to 6 months after completion. And this report is usually prepared by the supervision consultants. So you have to make sure that in the terms of reference of the supervision consultants, you also include preparation of a project completion report. Because the project completion report involves a lot of data collection, data relating to the project indicators and the project targets, right? So you have to make sure that all this data is collected before to enable you to prepare this completion report. And what is the data requirements? Data requirements are set out in the project results framework. Okay, we know what the indicators are, what the project targets are. So in relation to those project targets and indicators, you have to collect data. And what is the source for the collection of the data? That's also indicated in the project results framework. When we looked at the project results framework yesterday, one of the columns there, the third column, was source. So you can go back to that source and make sure that the data is assembled so that you can do the analysis on whether the project achieved the intended targets and indicators. Okay. So once this is done, it will be submitted to the MEF and to the development partner. Now the development partner will also do its own completion report. So the development partner will field a team, a DP team called a project completion team, will come to gather more data. They will use the EA's or PMU's completion report as the basis, but they will want to do more analysis and assessments. So for that purpose, they will want to collect more data. So they will come to discuss the completed project with the PMU and the EA, and they will also, or they may also collect more data for purposes of their own assessments. So when they have all this data and information, including the report that you have prepared, they will then do the assessments to determine whether the project was successful or not. And they will follow certain criteria in doing this evaluation to arrive at the overall project rating, whether the project was successful or not. And each DP will use a different criteria or methodology for doing this assessment. All right? The ADB, for example, this is the project completion report rating. I'm sharing with you how ADB does the evaluation or assessment of completed projects. This is not in the project management manual, because this is something that each DP will do differently. Okay, but this is how ADB does the evaluation or the assessment to arrive at the overall project rating. They look at 4 aspects, and all of these aspects can be traced back to the project results framework. Remember yesterday when we looked at project preparation or project formulation, we talked about the project results framework. And when we complete the project, when we do the evaluation, we go back to the project results framework. So one of the first things we look at for the evaluation is the question of relevance. Is the project still relevant? So if you look at the project results framework, when we talk about relevance, we talked about the impact, the hierarchy of results. The top level hierarchy at the top was something called impact. And the impact was aligned to the country's rectangular strategy phase 4 and the country's and Cambodia's national strategic development plan. Right? That was how the project was deemed to be relevant. The relevance was aligned to those goals or those strategic requirements. So when you complete the project 5, 7, sometimes 9 years later, you have to check whether the project is still relevant. It may be the country has changed its goals and focus areas. Cambodia may have changed. Its development NSDP may have changed the focus areas, and a project may not be relevant anymore. So that is an assessment that is done by the project completion team, whether the project is relevant or remains relevant. Okay. The next thing that is looked at is something called effectiveness. Was the project effective in delivering the expected outputs and outcomes? And how do we measure that? We go back to the project results framework. In the project results framework, if you remember, in the second column, we had indicators, performance indicators and targets in relation to each of the outcomes and outputs. So when we do the evaluation after completion, when we want to assess effectiveness, we have to check the output and outcome targets and indicators at the completion of the project, whether these output and outcome targets have been achieved. Okay. The next point is efficiency. Now, efficiency refers to the effective utilization of resources. Now, when we did project preparation, we did an assessment on the efficient utilization of resources. We did an assessment. Many of you may not recall what that assessment was that we discussed yesterday. And I'm referring to the economic analysis of projects. When we did an economic analysis of projects during project preparation, the main purpose of that review is to ensure that the project is utilizing resources efficiently, that there is a cost-benefit analysis. And this cost-benefit analysis usually is in the form of the calculation of the internal economic rate of return, economic internal rate of return, EIRR. Okay, so we did an EIRR calculation, and we had some at project preparation, and we also had a description of some of the benefits that were not captured by the calculation, and we also made some assumptions regarding that calculation. So when we complete the project, when the project is completed, we have to revisit that EIRR and that economic analysis to see whether the project is still economically viable, to see whether the assumptions that we used at project preparation are still valid at project completion. So that is an assessment that is done for efficiency at project completion. And finally, we have the issue of sustainability. Sustainability has two parts: financial sustainability and institutional sustainability. For financial sustainability, when we prepared the project, again, we looked at the financial analysis of the project and the financial analysis of the institution or the EA. So when we have completed the project, when we do the evaluation to assess sustainability, we have to revisit the financial analysis of the project that we did during project preparation. So recalculate the financial internal rate of return for revenue generating projects, or reassess the financial sustainability of the executing agency, and so on. So that is sustainability. We also look at the O&M arrangements, okay, because that is part of sustainability. So we look at these four areas: relevance, effectiveness, efficiency, and sustainability. And based on an assessment of these four areas, we arrive at the overall project rating. Okay, so that's how ADB does an evaluation of completed projects. Different, as I mentioned before, different DPs will have different methodologies, a different approach to evaluation of projects. So I'm just shared with you ADB's approach. All right. And the key of all this, the key document that is used is the project results framework, right? Because that sets out the performance indicators and targets. It sets out the hierarchy of results, impact, outcome, outputs, right? And then, of course, we have the financial analysis and the economic analysis that was done during project preparation. So that is, in summary, how we do the evaluation of projects at completion. All right. Now, I've pretty much come to the end of the two chapters. It is nearly coffee time. So we can take a break now, and unless somebody has a question, and if you're willing to raise your hands, I will answer your question immediately. If you send it in my chat, I will answer it later. All right. So if anybody has a question and you're willing to raise your hands, I'll be happy to respond. Anybody with questions? Okay, so please feel free to submit written questions. and I'll try to get to them later. In the meantime, please take a coffee break, 15 minutes. And when you come back, we will have an exercise that you might have some fun with. And that exercise will be, my colleague Ratanak will take you through that exercise later when you come back after the coffee break. So we'll see you in 15 minutes.